Hi students, in this video we are going to review how to use slope ratio to find missing sides and angles. Let's review some vocabulary that's important. First, we have this here. We call this the reference angle or the slope angle. This symbol is said out loud, theta. It is a variable like x or y that represents angles. So this right here is this angle. Theta is that angle. The hypotenuse is the side that's always across from the right angle. The opposite leg is the side that's all the way across from theta. And the adjacent, which means next to, adjacent leg is the one touching or next to theta. We also need to know that slope ratio is equal to the opposite leg divided by the adjacent leg. Now that we have that vocabulary, let's review what we learned in class. First, we reviewed slope. We can take a point and on a line and see how much rise, in this case 1, divided by how much run, in this case 5. So the slope is rise 1 divided by 5, run. We can also draw a slope triangle using the red point C. Here we'd have a rise of 2 and a run of 10. So we might think the slope is 2/10. This is equal when we divide both our numerator and our denominator by 2 to 1/5. So it's the same slope no matter what point we choose. So if we have these two triangles on the same line, we can look at what they have in common. So we start overlapping, then we get the blue triangle and the red triangle. They both have angle A in the triangles, and this we know is 11 degrees because we measured it. They're also both right triangles. And from when we explored slope, we have 1 and 5, and 2 and 10. We know that the slope ratio for the blue triangle from the 11 degrees opposite or rise 1 over or run adjacent 1/5. For the red triangle, our slope ratio opposite 2/10, and we saw that this is equal to 1/5. So they also have the same slope ratio. This leads us to a big idea that all right triangles with the same reference angle, in our example, a reference angle was 11 degrees, they have the same slope ratio. Slope ratio in our last example was 1/5. It's also true that if we knew what the slope ratio was, for example, like this, then we can figure out what the slope angle is. So here the slope ratio equals 1/5. So that means our reference angle must be 11 degrees. Let's do an example together of using this. Here, first we identify our slope angle. Slope angle is 11 degrees. Then we think, do we know what the slope ratio is? Yes, the slope ratio that matches 11 degrees is 1/5. Now let's remember, slope ratio equals our opposite leg divided by our adjacent leg. So we find our opposite across next to adjacent. So our slope ratio will equal opposite y over 40, and this should equal 1/5 because our slope angle is 11. Here we have an algebra equation we can solve. We'll multiply both sides by 40 to undo dividing. 1 times 40 is 40. 5 times 1 is 5. And then we do 40 divided by 5, which equals 8. In class, we also learned these other important slope ratios, and we can use them to solve for information, just like we did in the last example. For example, here, let's take a screenshot so we can write on this. Here, in order to solve for x, first, we need to label our sides opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. 2 is our reference angle, so this is the opposite leg. X is right next to 2, so it's the adjacent leg. And across from our right angle is the hypotenuse. To solve for x, we need to know the slope ratio for 2. So we'll go back to our chart. Oops, I think this actually should be 22. I apologize, 22. We'll go back to our chart and we'll see that the slope ratio for 22 degrees is 2/5. 2/5 should equal our opposite leg divided by our adjacent leg. Because remember, slope ratio is opposite over adjacent. And remember, we get this from our slope ratio chart. From there, we're going to undo dividing by x by multiplying. So we have 2x divided by 5 equals 100. Running out of room. Multiply by 5 on both sides to undo dividing by 5. 2x equals 500, and our last step, divide by 2. So x equals 250. So that's another example of how we can use slope ratio. I hope this was helpful. If you have other questions, please come for office hours.